the Public Service Amendment Bill, which the revised version of the bill now has gone back to the National Assembly.
Those who are dependent on social grants be vulnerable to really predatory business practices on the part of cash paymaster services.
Looking forward to the completion of this bill and it being taken to the President for approval or sign off so that it becomes legislation.
Sustain those lives in the hope that we will surmount the challenges of the yawning unemployment, poverty and inequality we face. We are going to have a professional, ethical-minded public service.
Welcome back to Governing Tomorrow, the podcast that is powered by the New South Institute, where we explore ideas, policies, and choices that will shape a capable and ethical public service in South Africa. I am your host, Yoliswa Makhasi. I am the head for Public Service Reform Program at the New South Institute. Today, we're engaging a voice that has been at the center of South Africa's constitutional and democratic struggles for more than 2 decades. Before I introduce you to our guest, I want to firstly acknowledge the progress that has been made by Parliament and the South African government in respect to one of the pieces of legislation that are critical for the reform work that we are doing in support of building an ethical and capable South African public service, the Public Service Amendment Bill, which the revised version of the bill now has gone back to the National Assembly through the Portfolio Committee for Public Service and Administration. And we have seen last week the Portfolio Committee has approved the bill, and now the bill is undergoing the processes of ratification in Parliament. We're looking forward to the completion of this bill and it being taken to the President for approval or sign off so that it becomes legislation. And we do know that the biggest challenge now is to ensure that the bill, once approved by the President, there is implementation of the legislation. Otherwise, the legislation is not going to implement itself. So my guest today is Ms. Nicole Fritz, and she is a respected human rights lawyer, an advocate for constitutionalism, and one of the sharpest thinkers in our civic landscape. Nicole has led organizations such as the Southern Africa Litigation Center, Freedom Under Law, and the Helen Suzman Foundation. She is currently the executive director of the Campaign for the Free Expression and an affiliate researcher on preventing state capture at the New South Institute. Today, we ask a simple question but unsettling question. What happens if South Africa fails to reform the public sector? What will happen if South Africa fails to reform the public sector? Just before we delve into this question, Nicole, let me invite you to just tell our listeners, who are you and why you do the work that you do? Over to you.
Thanks, Yoliswa, and thank you very much for inviting me to participate in the podcast. Congratulations to the NSI for all the sterling work they have done in ensuring the passage of the Public Service Amendment Bill. I think that is an enormous advance for our democracy and for South Africa. I think I grew up, under apartheid. I was very fortunate to come of age at the time of our transition to democracy. And it feels, fortunate to me that I have got to live in this country at that time. And it has felt not only sort of an ethical imperative, but also intellectually exciting to be engaged in the work of trying to build a democracy that not only serves all of South Africa, but is actually a leading light on the international stage. And that is why I've wanted to do the work that I have done over what you point out is now over 2 decades.
So, Nicole, one of the things we know is that behind every failing service, every procurement scandal, every delayed reform, and every social frustration that people experience lies one core truth. A state is only as strong as the capability, professionalism, and integrity of the people who serve it. So, in this episode, as we unpack the constitutional stakes, the risk of new reforms of state capture and the impact on citizens' daily lives, the shrinking of civic space, and the non-negotiable reforms that South Africa simply cannot afford, I just want us to begin with really the bigger picture from a constitutional and democratic perspective. What do you see as the long-term risks for South Africa's public sector if it is not professionalized and reformed? What are those long-term risks that we're looking at?
We know that the challenges that confront South Africa are absolutely existential, right? They're the three horsemen of the apocalypse. It is unemployment, poverty, and inequality. And there can be no real future for South Africa, I think, if we persist with those yawning challenges. And the fact is, the only way we address those challenges is if we have a functional, competent, professional state. And at the heart of that must lie a professional, ethical-minded public service. That is the only way that we are going to be able to address and surmount those challenges. It also means in the present day, in the here and now, while we have those challenges, so many South Africans rely on the state for basic services, for and if we are going to sustain those lives, sustain those lives in the hope that we will surmount the challenges of the yawning unemployment, poverty, and inequality we face, we are going to have a professional, ethical-minded public service. And it's, honestly, I mean, we are going to, in order to surmount those challenges and to have those challenges addressed by a public service, we are going to have to have a public service that is unlike any in the world, that is unrivaled in terms of its expertise, its innovation, its capacity. So those challenges mean that the challenges for our state and our public service are enormous, and we have to be equal to them.
How do we get there?
Well, I think one step, and a really important step, is the passage of the Public Service Amendment Bill and the changes that we see being brought about through that legislation.
You've also worked very closely on issues like the state capture. And when you look at South Africa today and the reforms work that we're talking about and where are we, what do you see as vulnerabilities within the public sector that could allow new forms of capture or that can enable institutional decay to re-emerge if these reforms are not implemented? What do you see in that space?
So when I was here at the New South Institute's conference speaking about the Public Service Amendment Bill, I spoke about a case in which I'd been involved. And it really is, I have been involved in strategic litigation over 2 decades now. And, one of the cases that I recall significantly, and I feel, potentially had the most critical impact, was this matter relating to social grants. It was a matter that was first brought by Black Sash, where there was the possibility that that social grants, in fact, would not be delivered. That the underlying contract, which enabled the delivery, the distribution of these grants, was not proper, and Black Sash sought the intervention of the Constitutional Court to help oversee that process. And what we saw there was under the aegis, under the direction of the then Minister of Social Development, Batabile Dlamini, that her sort of core team, her Director Generals and those who served under them. So the public service within the Department of Social Development had effectively been sidelined, and Ms. Dlamini had appointed these parallel work streams, which essentially looked to provide tenders, contracts to what was then CPS, Cash Paymaster Services. And that intervention, as I say, principally by Black Sash, but I was then leading the Freedom Under Law, I think sought to ensure greater oversight and the calamity whereby, social grant beneficiaries might have had to see their social grant stopped. That, in fact, was averted. But we did see for far too long those who are dependent on social grants be vulnerable to really predatory business practices on the part of Cash Paymaster Services, which was the corporation with the company with which Batabile Dlamini and the work streams worked in order to try and extend what had already been declared to be an unlawful contract. And so, many of the most vulnerable in our country were being sold financial products that they didn't understand, hadn't been, where proper consent wasn't obtained. And then because this company knew when their social grants were being delivered into their bank accounts, those grants would be immediately taken out in order to service these financial products. So often the most vulnerable in our country found themselves in terrible debt without the grants that they needed in order to ensure that they were eating and their children were eating. And that, as I said, was a crisis averted. But what has to be addressed is this idea that ministers should be able to bypass the public service and appoint parallel advisors who are essentially engaged in sort of nefarious doings for personal enrichment, and that obviously, far from ensuring that our state functions for all South Africans, and especially for those who are most vulnerable, we see then our state repurposed essentially to enrich interests that really should not be enriched by the functioning of our state.
So I think that I've been a government official for years, and I'm quite aware, I'm not aware specifically of the details of this particular case that you are referring to, but I'm quite aware that in government from time to time we do task teams and work streams to deal with a number of projects and complexity that we would experience, or also just to get more hands and get more players into that environment as part of supporting this work that needs to be done. And when that happens, usually, or in fact, it's not usually, that's how it must be, that is a process that gets led by the head of the department. So are you saying in this case, this particular process was not led by the head of the department?
They were deliberately sidelined. And to some extent, the only reason that we came to know of that sidelining, which was kind of an abuse of the powers of the ministry, was because those DGs came forward and provided affidavits to the court. Okay. So you're absolutely right. Of course, I mean, and again, to underline the complexities and the gravity of the challenges facing our state mean that we are, obviously going to need to elicit expert advice and input, but that advisors would be appointed not only against the advice of the heads of department, but the heads of department would be sidelined and ignored. That is enormously troubling, and that's what we saw in the social grants
I think that
crisis play
out. That really goes into this whole discussion about the political and administrative
Exactly.
interface and how you deal with political interference as and when it comes through in the system itself. So if you were to advise officials who experience such, in your view, what is the best way to handle it or to deal with it? I mean, in this case, as you are saying, at least the involvement of external players from civil society managed to avert what could have been a disaster. But if you had to advise the officials when they experience such experiences, what is the best way, in your view, to handle such?
Well, I imagine that it will sort of depend on the particular context. I also think it is very difficult for those in the public service, to make public pronouncements. In this case, as I said, there was a legal process put in play, and their testimony was sought, and so they could place that before the courts, and they did that bravely. I do think that, one of the other things that we need to do as a country, and I know that there are all sorts of efforts to do this, is to strengthen the protections that we make available to whistleblowers. And we have to not only strengthen the protections that we make available to whistleblowers, but we also, and this podcast has been recorded at a time when we are seeing, the ad hoc parliamentary committee into the revelations made by Lieutenant General Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi. We're seeing the Madlanga Commission, a commission chaired by Justice Madlanga, into those same revelations. And those go to, what must alarm the public greatly about the state of our justice system and our police, because the allegations are that there has been criminal infiltration of our police ranks at the highest level. And of course, that means that the public is going to have suspicions as to whether our police, our criminal justice system can protect them. And if members of the public have those concerns, and I think those concerns are justified, then I think, members who are occupying sensitive positions in public service are also going to have fears about approaching the criminal justice system to keep them safe when they want to make revelations which they believe are in the public interest, where their professionalism, their expertise is being sidelined in favor of some improperly constituted task team, parallel work stream. So I think that there are multiple fronts that we need to work on, certainly protection of whistleblowers, but I think absolutely strengthening our criminal justice system across the board.
I have so much trust in systems and processes in institutions, and it is my hope that the processes that are being engaged in respect to the criminal justice system in the country, the security cluster, are really going to help improve the systems and processes. Because yes, we may have rogue cops in the system, but we also have many good cops in the system, and we can't paint everyone in the same brush of being bad cops. But I do hear what you are saying, that for an official who wants to whistleblow through a process of following the police process of going to this police station and opening a case against something that they've picked up that they think is critical, they might think twice, because they don't know who that police officer at the station level talks to, and also fear of being compromised in the process, because we see whistleblowers being killed, we see whistleblowers being under a lot of danger. So I hear that, but I think my message would also be to the officials: we must not give up on the security cluster, and we have to continue to work with the security cluster to ensure that it is strengthened, and that their processes and system and governance mechanisms are in place and they deliver for South Africans.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And I certainly wouldn't want to be understood to be suggesting that there are no good cops or, really dedicated, committed individuals in our criminal justice system. But we owe it to them and to the public to ensure that the leadership of those structures and those systems, as you say, are beyond reproach, right? Otherwise, it must be so demoralizing to work within a system where you are I mean, you are on the front line as a police officer or in the criminal justice system, right? And to know that your leadership may have been infiltrated by criminal elements. And that's why it is important that we've put in place these mechanisms. And then the hope must be that we take, once we have established what the facts are relating to the system, that we put in place a process whereby we can ensure that the leadership and the systems themselves are sound, that there is a system that that guarantees integrity and professionalization. So,
as a scholar of public administration and a practitioner at the same time, one of my biggest wishes with the Madlanga Commission specifically is that it really brings to the fore a number of recommendations that strengthen this political administrative interface. And I mean, I know that a commission is not going to have a clear definition of roles and responsibilities. That's not their job, between a clear roles responsibility between ministers and the administration, or between ministers and heads of departments. But a certain level of guidance on that particular matter, and a certain mechanism that can be introduced to enforce this division of roles and responsibilities. Yes, the Public Service Act now is very clear about devolution of roles and responsibilities to the public, to the administrators. But how do you enforce that at the level of implementation? Right. So that's one of my biggest hopes of what is going to come out of that, so that we remove this fluffiness and ambiguity around this issue of roles and responsibilities.
Right. But even short of that, if what is produced is a clear diagnostic as to what has gone wrong and how there has been a confusion of roles and responsibilities, as to where there have been leverage points where criminal actors might have been able to obtain power and influence, that diagnostic will be invaluable then to inform what you say is a clearer legislative framework, perhaps, or policy framework, which guides governance leadership of those systems and processes.
Having listened to the witnesses and the testimonies and everything that's happening in the Madlanga Commission, what do you think about exactly what you are hoping for? Are we on the path to get there? What is your own sense?
I think my sense is it is at this point too early to say. I mean, I think as a kind of observer, as many in the public will be, there are these two, parallel bodies, both examining the same issues. What is produced will need to be weighed against each other. I think that can be helpful. More disclosure rather than less, I think, particularly when it relates to our criminal justice sector. But I think, we will have to make that assessment once we are approaching the end of these processes and we know who has been called, what the extent of the testimony has been, the cross-examination that has occurred. But certainly I think we're seeing, a large number of those persons who are implicated be required to come forward and give testimony, and that's important.
Yeah. Well, we are not here about the Madlanga Commission, but it is a talking point in the country. So there's nothing wrong with us just picking up in respect to that. It's also an area of interest for our work, because one of our programs looks at the state capture and fighting corruption in South Africa. So you currently lead the campaign for free expression, isn't it?
I do, yes.
Yes. So that gives you basically a vantage point over civic space and freedoms, hey?
That's right.
Am I correct to make that assumption? So my interest is, how does a weakening public service affect freedom of expression, civic participation, and potentially the rise of a more authoritarian political culture? How does a weakened public service affect such?
Well, when a state is broken, and you have a broken state, even in a country without the challenges South Africa faces, I think is only going to be able to sort of retain power through authoritarianism, right? But in a state with the challenges of South Africa, a state that is entirely unequal to meeting those challenges doesn't have a hope of retaining its power without, sliding into authoritarianism. And so I think it is absolutely crucial that we institute the reforms that are proposed in the Public Service Amendment Bill, allowing for a stronger public service, a stronger state, a more confident state. And I think a state in, you've indicated that I lead the campaign for free expression. Free expression is an interesting civil right. It's often a determinative civil right, sort of indicative of the health of our democracy. Free expression means that we must sort of tolerate views and speech that we don't like, that we disagree with, that is unpopular. Of course, an authoritarian state can't tolerate any of that, right? It has to clamp down and repress that type of expression. But, even in a functioning democracy, which is serving its people, there is going to be speech that we don't like. But of course, where one is serving the public, where the public recognizes that the state is serving it, that their lives are improving as a result of the state, that allows for an environment where speech is vibrant and creative. It's still going to elicit speech we don't like, but there is much more of an ability to tolerate that because of the confidence of, I think, the satisfaction with the delivery of the state.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, so when I noticed something, and I don't know if you have any role to play from a point of the work that you do. I noticed something when Parliament, NCOP was consulting on the public hearings in respect to the amendment bill, the Public Service Amendment, the two bills, because it's the Public Service Amendment Bill and the Public Administration and Management Amendment Bill that were being consulted at the same time. And one issue that came out that I observed, because I participated in almost all provincial hearings now as a representative of NSI, so wearing my civil society kind of eye into things. One of the things I observed is the absence of really strong quality inputs from civil society structures in the public hearings and the amendment processes. And I don't know if you can, there's any work that you do with civil society structures in terms of that, because that could point to a number of things. That could point to a number of issues like capacity of civil society to engage on the issues, because these issues are not the issues of reforms. Yes, reform is about fixing day-to-day issues, but the language of reforms is a very technical language on its own. So it might not necessarily be accessible to everybody. So as a result, in some of the hearings we participated at, you could just see that the people who are participating, even though there's people, the hall is full, is that there's a very small fraction of them who understand why they are here and how to engage with this particular process, which then makes this whole idea of public participation a joke, because those who would not have any idea of what's happening, they come from wards that are managed by certain parties. They will go with what their party says they must agree with or do not agree with, without really exercising their own independent thoughts in terms of some of these areas. And I've seen this in action during the hearings themselves. So what do you think could be done from a civil society point of view as part of the leaders in the civil society space?
Look, I think that is probably a challenge that we're seeing across the board, that the quality of the participation often is certainly not what it should be. I think we're also seeing, because we have a state that is often in retreat, that it's not making available the opportunities for participation and consultation when it when it should. And so we've seen a number of court challenges be taken and civil society win on the basis that public participation and consultation has not been elicited when it should be by state functionaries in line with the constitutional requirements. But I think you're pointing to a different concern, is that even when those opportunities are being made available,
with the public hearings process, those opportunities were there, and NSI participated in almost all the provinces because there was an opportunity to participate and open to everybody, and we monitored that very closely. But still, the participation from a quality perspective was quite minimal in my view.
Absolutely. And I do think that there has to be capacity building around that. Again, I mean, civil society collectively has been flourishing, vibrant part of our democracy. And I think, much is owed them for, how they have acted in, moments like state capture, real challenges to our democracy. And many pay tribute to the quality of our civil society and its vibrancy. But I think that is to ignore the pressures that it faces, right? And the fact that I've spoken about the poverty in this country, we know that all too well, that many are operating in sort of very constrained circumstances. And that with the challenges facing our country, I think, civil society players that have the capacity are often sort of locked up in, litigation. And it's just impossible for our civil society, as strong as it is in various moments, to be able to cover the field in the way that is required. So I certainly think that there is room for capacity building. I think hopefully this is an enormous step forward, the advance of the public sector amendment bill. But I also think that there needs to be a better understanding of the different roles that are played within our democracy. We've already spoken about the Madlanga Commission, and we've spoken about the ad hoc committee in Parliament. But from my observations, certainly of the ad hoc committee, and we're talking about members of Parliament, their failure to understand what their role is within our constitutional democracy is enormously concerning. And when we have MPs failing to understand what their role is within a committee like the ad hoc committee, then I think we're also seeing civil society and members of the public, sort of battling with what is required of them. And so the hope must be, obviously there are a number of other interventions that will have to come to bolster the professionalization of our public service.
So, okay, continue now, Nicole.
But with that we would see a kind of raising of a rising tide lifts various boats, and that the idea is that enhancement of the professionalization of our public service would spill over, and we would see improvement in the quality of civil society interventions and in all role players in our constitutional democracy.
I was interested to hear more as well when you were reflecting on the failure of the politicians, the MPs in the ad hoc committee. I was hoping you could reflect a little bit more around what do you see as the key failures in the process that they're engaging in currently, or is it? I don't know. I just wanted to hear a little bit more about it.
So, one, and I earned a bit of controversy around this. For instance, I saw an engagement. I saw some of the engagement with Mary de Haas. Now, Mary de Haas is a woman who has served in civil society. She wrote a letter to the Minister of Police. It is that letter which he has relied upon to justify why he disbanded the political killings task team. There was the engagement with her, that sense that she had acted illegitimately in expressing her concern to the minister. Every citizen is perfectly entitled to express their concerns. Those concerns may be entirely unsupported, unjustified, but that is what a vibrant democracy rests on, this idea of exchange, communication. I can make those concerns available. It is for you, as the responsible member of the executive, to make a determination as to whether those concerns are justified. And it is for you as the member of the executive to bear accountability for why that decision was acted upon. And so the aggression with which she was engaged, when she's a member of the public, those are her representatives in Parliament, right? And they serve in Parliament. Yes, they're elected in terms of political parties. But once you're in Parliament, you're serving as a public representative for all South Africans. To engage her as they did, I thought showed a clear failure to appreciate what their role was as members of Parliament. And I think if we're seeing members of Parliament failing to appreciate what their roles are, then I think that confusion plays itself out across the ecosystem of democracy.
I'm actually looking forward to see the product that comes out of the parliamentary process, because I have noticed that they've been, I think that the parliamentary committee has been quite robust, like very robust in engaging with witnesses, with most of the witnesses, if not all. I have not watched everything, but I've watched a few of witnesses that they've engaged in. And I just picked up a really trend of robustness that sometimes is like, God help me never to appear in commissions and processes like this one, because it's quite robust and it's quite in your face in a way. So definitely I want to see how that comes out finally with recommendations on areas for implementation and etc. I'm looking forward to see what their outcome is going to be, and how their outcome and the outcome of the Madlanga Commission complement each other.
Exactly. I am looking forward to that too.
It's going to be quite interesting,
yes.
To do that. So the one other thing for me, I just thought I wanted to, as we move towards closure, is just around, I mean, you've spent your career defending constitutional democracy and advocating for ethical governance. So what is the single most critical reform, in your view, that South Africa cannot afford to ignore? And what gives you hope or concern about our ability to implement it? Just one single most important reform that relates to professionalizing the public service, to building capacity of the state to be able to respond to the challenges that we experience and to chart the way into the future in terms of positioning South Africa. So what is that single thing in your view?
I think, and maybe this is too broad, but we have to build the state. We have to strengthen the state. There is no way that we succeed as a country if we don't strengthen the state. And one very important element of that, an essential element of that, is the professionalization of the public service, which we secure through the Public Service Amendment Bill. So that has been a critical accomplishment of the New South Institute. I think it is unfortunate, but understandable, that here in South Africa there are large segments of the population who feel that they have been ill-served, badly served by our government and its performance. That, unfortunately, is chiming with dynamics globally where democracy has been called into question. And this idea that democracy is too unwieldy a system, and that effectively one should capture the state, rule through authoritarianism, and if you happen to be among the chosen few that the autocrat rules in favor of, well, that's how you need to direct your efforts. And I think that is enormously concerning, that there are real reasons to be dissatisfied with the performance of the South African state at this point. that it chimes, as I say, with a ascendant global right-wing movement that is questioning the legitimacy of democracy.
Yep.
That is concerning.
And linked to that, one of my biggest worries is the state losing its legitimacy with the people. And I mean, if you currently look globally, a number of countries, institutions, states are really not faring well in terms of your barometers that are there that are looking at trust of citizens in government. And even South Africa is not doing that great, because we are below 50 in terms of the trust levels of South Africans in the government and the offering of government. So it's an issue that requires attention.
Absolutely.
And the only way, in my view, the only practical way to bring back the trust of people into government is it's not spinning things. It's really about going deeper into what's wrong, and which we were saying earlier on, the commission is also helping in terms of that. And there's other efforts anyway. There's the ad hoc committee on the issues of the security cluster. There's another ad hoc committee on the not an ad hoc committee, that one. I think it's the transport committee that's also looking at issues that are related to the road accident fund as well. There's a lot of things that are being unearthed that are coming out that we're not aware of as South Africans. So if that trajectory continues and the state does not intervene and fix things, and fixing things for me, I mean ensure that quality services are delivered and accessible to people. That's very important.
Exactly. A delivery is what is required, right? That's the critical feature and function of the state. That people, can go about their lives. They don't have to. I mean, if they're interested in politics, absolutely be absorbed in it. But on a day-to-day basis, for people who aren't necessarily politically minded, to go about, know that their basic services are guaranteed, and to be able to live their lives with that security. And I think that's what the state has to do. Afrobarometer came out with this incredibly concerning statistic recently about the number of South Africans, and there's been a huge jump since 2021. So it's recently the number of South Africans who would now back military rule, if it meant delivery of services. And that should alarm us all. I mean, this idea, I think it's a really problematic and disingenuous. The campaigns that are being run by the likes of Solidarity and AfroForum, looking to appeal to a strong man like Donald Trump, this idea that, we will, sort of just leap over the fact that we have a sovereign state here, the idea that you appeal to that strong man, that he will sort of rule in your favor. Those are such frightening tendencies in our country.
Yeah, and what's your call to action, Nicole? What is that call to action if given an opportunity to talk to South Africans? As a leader in civil society, what's your call to action?
My call to action is, whilst I understand why people might be feeling fed up and demoralized and inclined to be disengaged, we simply can't afford to. We have to remain engaged. We have to champion processes such as the Public Service Amendment Bill, secure its signature enactment into law. But we have to be engaged in innovating and delivering the checks and balances that is going to ensure that we have a strong state, but that is held accountable by our democracy, and that ensures delivery for all citizens.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I just want to say that, firstly, as the governing tomorrow, we just want to thank you for your wisdom, for your clarity, and your continued service to South Africa's democracy. And to our listeners, we do want to thank you once more for joining this important conversation and helping us, working with us to answer the question on why public sector reform is a must and it's not optional. So let's continue to keep thinking, to keep questioning, and to keep working towards an ethical, capable state. It is very important for all of us to be working together to support government and to hold government accountable when necessary as part of civil society structures, but mainly to support, to ensure that this work does not fall off the cracks, and that where there is expertise that we have in civil society and other structures outside of government, we tap into those expertise to be able to ensure this work moves on, because we have only one South Africa. We don't have another South Africa. Some of us don't have anywhere to run to if South Africa doesn't work. So it's important for us that South Africa works for us, for our children, and for the children of our children and next generations to come.
Yeah. Thank you, Yoliswa.
Thank you very much, Nicole.
Thank you.